Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the Reign of Hormozd. The sun lifted its slants into the sky, and the dark night quailed before its brilliance. Bahram called for the chief scribe, and together they wrote a splendid letter to the Emperor of China. Bahram wrote, "The need to apologize racks me with pain. My heart is filled with regret and cold sighs. From now on, I shall respect your country, and if I become lord of all the world, I shall treat you as my younger brother. Wash all thoughts of vengeance from your soul, and do not keep China and Iran separate from one another." Then he turned to other business. He opened his treasury and distributed silver, horses, and slaves to his army. His secret aim in this was to further his ambition. He chose a worthy warrior from among his troops and made him the governor of Khorasan. Sunk in thought, he himself set off from Balkh to Ray on the day of Khordad in the month of Day. He turned many ideas over in his mind and then gave orders that coins were to be minted in the name of Hormozd's son, Khosrow Parviz. He selected an eloquent, trustworthy merchant, one who was suitable to carry out a delicate task, and told him to take a purse of these coins to Ctesiphon. There he was to buy fine Byzantine brocades, worked in silk on a gold ground, so that the coins would be taken to the king, and he would see them. He wrote a letter to Hormozd, filled with boasting and vanity. He mentioned many matters, Parmodé and Seva Shah's army, the battles he had fought, and the king's present of a black spindle case and a woman's coif. Then he wrote, "In my dreams, I never see the splendor of the king's face. When your noble son, Khosrow Parviz, sits on the throne, I shall level the mountains and make them plains if he orders me to, and turn the deserts to an oasis of his enemies' blood." In this way he hoped to have the innocent prince killed. He said to the merchant, "When Hormozd sees the coins, he will be alarmed, and when he no longer has Khosrow Parviz to help him, he'll see the fate that I have in store for him. Once I have established my authority over the country, I shall tear the Sassanians up by the roots. God did not create the earth for them, and it's time they forfeited this favor." A messenger took his letter to Baghdad, and when Hormozd read it, his face turned as pale as fenugreek. Then news came of the coins minted in his son's name, and sorrow was piled on sorrow. He writhed inwardly and became suspicious of his son. He confided his suspicions in Ian Goshhasp, saying, "Khosrow has become rebellious and wants to separate himself from me. He had coins minted in his own name, and what could be more contemptuous of my authority than this?" Ian Goshhasp said, "May your horse and battlefield never be without you." Hormozd said, "I'm going to get rid of this wretch immediately." Secretly, they summoned a man and sat down with the king that night. Hormozd said to him, "Do as I say. Banish Khosrow from the face of the earth." The man replied, "I shall do it. I'll use spells to drive out pity from my heart. Have poison brought from the king's treasury, and when he's drunk at night, I'll mix it with his wine. This will be better than shedding his blood." But the chamberlain learned of this and could not sleep from anxiety. He hurried to Khosrow and told him the secret plan. When Khosrow Parviz heard that the king of the world was secretly plotting to kill him, he fled in the darkness of the night from Ctesiphon and seemed to disappear from the face of the earth. Not wanting to lose his precious head to no purpose, he made all haste to Azerbaijan. When news reached the country's governors and the lords in the marches that Khosrow had fled with a few horsemen from the king's court, they made inquiries as to where he might be. Men like Baden Perez and Shirzel, both just warriors with the strength of elephants, Shirin and pious Bastu, Kanjas from Oman, Bivard from Kerman, and Sam, who was descended from Esfandiar, and Shiraz. One by one, they came with their warriors and sought out Khosrow Parviz. Khosrow said to them, "I fear the king and his courtiers, but if you will go to the fire temple and there solemnly swear to protect me, never to break this oath, I shall stay here with confidence and have no fear of Armin's designs against me." The warriors went to the fire temple and swore as he requested, saying that they would hold him as dear as their own eyes. As soon as he felt safe, Khosrow sent out spies to find out what his father said about his flight, and whether he was plotting anything new. When Hormozd learned that Khosrow had fled, he immediately had Gostam and Bandai, Khosrow's maternal uncles, thrown into prison, as well as all of Khosrow's other relatives, and there was much talk about this. At this time the king said to Khosrow, "We seem to have no recourse, and pain is our companion. Now that Khosrow has gone, what shall we do against that wretched slave Bahram?" Khosrow said, "Your Majesty, the business of Bahram has gone on for long enough. It's my blood he secretly wants to shed, because I was the first person to humiliate him. Send me to him with my legs in shackles. It may be that this will benefit you." The king replied, I can't do that. It would be the work of Ahriman. No, I'll dispatch an army with you at its head, and you can win glory in battle. But first, send someone to him to sound out what he is thinking. If he is ambitious for sovereignty, for the crown and throne, good fortune will finally desert him. But if he is prepared to be my subject and prefers peace, I'll give him a portion of the world to rule and place a hero's crown on his head. Let me know immediately what he is up to. Don't delay. Be as quick as you can. There was a man from his town who was a prisoner in the king's jail, and we heard that Khosrow was going to war. He sent someone to him with a message saying, "I'm a fellow townsman of yours, imprisoned here. If you beg me from the king, I'll accompany you on this expedition. I'll fight before you as your protector in battle. If only I can get out of this narrow prison." Khosrow sent someone to the king to say on his behalf, "One of my fellow townsmen is languishing in your jail. Give him to me, your majesty, so that he can come with me on this expedition." The king said, "That evil good-for-nothing? When is he ever going to fight in front of you in battle? He's a violent criminal, a lout, a thief. You must be hoping for a bribe from him." Well, at the moment, I don't want to deny you anything, even though there's no worse bodyguard than he is. And he handed this bloodthirsty devil over to Khosrow. Khosrow led his army out, and they marched as quickly as the wind as far as Hamadan, where they halted. Khosrow made inquiries as to whether anyone there understood the stars and could foresee the future. Everyone said, "You'll be pleased with the astrologer who comes to you. There is a rich old lady who lives here, who some seem to think she knows all the secrets of the stars. Whatever she says comes to pass, and she can tell you in the summer what will happen in the autumn." Khosrow sent someone with a horse to fetch her, and when she arrived, he questioned her about the king's business and about his own military expedition. Then he said to her, "Whisper in my ear whether I will die in bed or by my enemy's dagger." As he was talking privately with the old woman about his affairs, the man whom he begged from the king passed in front of the woman, glanced at his companion, and went on. The woman said, "Who is that man? We should weep for the harm he'll do to you. Your sweet life is in his hand. My curse is on him, skin and bones." When Khosrow heard this, he remembered something he had heard long before, something an astrologer had told him that he had forgotten. "Your life is in the hands of a neighbor who is a thief, a lout, and a worthless wretch. He will confront you during a long journey. You will cry out for help, and he will shed your blood." He wrote a letter to the king. "That man I begged you should not have been freed from prison. He's something worse than devil's spawn. You told me this, but I did not have you roll far, and so could not see the truth. As soon as he arrives, have his head cut off." He sealed the letter, and when the seal was dry, he summoned his fellow townsmen. He praises on them, gave them some money, and called down God's blessings on him. Then he said, "Quickly and secretly take this letter to the king. If he gives you an answer, bring it straight back to me. Don't stay with the king." The young man took the letter and set off brooding as he went. He said to himself, "I was chained and imprisoned. I couldn't move, and I'd no food. God got me out of this terrible mess, and now my blood and brains are boiling at the thought of going back to Ctesiphon. He went gloomily along the road for a while, and then he opened the letter to the king. When he read his commander's letter, he was bewildered at the ways of the world. He said, "This is my neighbor who begged me from the king, who said it was a noble deed to spare me, and now he wants to shed my blood. Did this idea come to him in a dream? Well, now he's going to find out what bloodshed means, and all his troubles will be over." His head whirling, he turned back and traveled as fast as the wind. As he approached the commander, he saw that there was nobody around. Iron Goshap was resting in his tent, brooding on the king and what fate had in store, and there was no servant or companion or sword or horse nearby. When his neighbor entered the tent, Iron Goshap knew that he had come to shed his blood. The man clapped his hand on his sword, and Iron Goshap tried to soften him with words. He said, "Young man, you're mistaken. Wasn't it I who begged you from the king when you despaired of life?" The man replied, "You did. But what did I do to make you want to destroy me?" As he said this, he struck Iron Goshap's neck with his sword, and the commander's day of feasting and fighting were at an end. He brought the severed head out of the tent while the army was still unaware of what had happened. Knowing he would be condemned for shedding his commander's blood, he made his way as quickly as he could to Bahram Chubayneh. He said to him, "Here's the head of your enemy, who is planning to kill you. He led an army here against you, not knowing what you intended." Bahram asked, "Whose head is this, and why should I weep over it?" "This man is Iron Goshap, who came from the king's court to fight against you." Bahram said to him, "This noble man had come from the king's court to make peace between me and the king, and you cut his head off while he was sleeping. You will receive such a punishment from me that all who see will weep for you." He ordered that a gibbet be erected before his door in view of the army and the countryside, and there the wretch was strung up alive, so that he understood in his heart what he had done. It was known that Iron Goshap was dead. Some of the horsemen he had brought with him went over to Bahram and others to Khosrow Parviz, hoping to revive their fortunes in the world. The army was like a shepherdless flock that disperses on a day of wind and snow. When Hormozd learned of his commander's fate, he was so downcast that he gave no audiences, and no one saw him with a wine-glass in his hand. He found no peace. He could neither eat nor sleep, and his eyes were always filled with tears. Repeatedly he gave orders that no one was to be admitted to him. One of the courtiers said that Bahram was preparing for war and was intent on seizing the imperial throne. Another said that Khosrow Parviz was so angry with the king that he was leading an army against Iran. The chieftains were bewildered, and each one had a different opinion of what was happening. When these rumors spread through Ctesiphon, the king's rule lost all authority. His servants became anxious and quarrelsome, and those who had blessed him now cursed him. Few of his men remained at their post at court, and to the king's heart the world had become a narrow place. Bandai and Goshtam learned that the king's far had darkened. The prisoners freed themselves from their chains and appointed one of their number to find out what was happening, and who among the warlike chieftains was still at the court. When they learned how matters stood, they cast aside all pretense of loyalty and broke out of the prison. Such a tumult across the whole plain rang with it, and the troops who were in the city stood powerless against them. Now armed and with followers and weapons, Goshtam and Bandai marched determinedly on the palace. They washed all trace of shame from their eyes. Then a detachment of troops appeared from the bazaar, heading toward the palace. Goshtam addressed them. "If you wish to join us, renounce your loyalty to the king, because Hormozd has turned aside from all good sense and from the true path. From now on, you should not call him king. Punish him. Make Persia's glory as bitter as colocynth for him. We shall have you as our vanguard and place a new king on Persia's throne. And if you do not falter in this enterprise, we shall put Persia in your hands, while we ourselves will retire to some corner of the world with our companions." At Goshtam's words, as one man, the troops cursed the king and cried, "May there never again be a king who seeks to shed his son's blood." Roused by his speech, they became shameless, setting fire to the palace gates and swarming into the audience hall, where they snatched the crown from the king's head and dragged him down from the throne. Then they put hot irons into his eyes, and the bright lamps of his life turned dark. They left him, still alive in this state, and looted all the wealth that was there. We now begin the reign of Khosrow Parviz. By night, Bandai and Goshtam quickly sent a message with a change of horses to Khosrow, who was then at the fire temple called Arza Goshhasp, to tell him what had happened. But when the envoy described the tumult in Baghdad, the young man's face turned as pale as fenugreek. He said, "Any man who ignorantly leaves the ways of wisdom and has no fear of the turning heavens will lead a profitless life. If this evil you describe were to please me, my sleep and food would turn to fire. Even though my father tried to shed my blood and I fled from my aunt Ran, I am still his slave, and will listen to all he has to say." Immediately, he set off with a large number of troops from Barda, Ardabil, and Armenia, traveling as quick as fire. When news reached Baghdad that a new claimant to the throne was on his way, the town grew peaceful again, and Khosrow was encouraged by the calm. The city's chieftains came out to welcome him. They seated him on the ivory throne and placed a golden torque about his neck and a splendid crown on his head. Khosrow entered the town in sorrow and went sighing to his father, his face a witness to the grief he felt. When he saw him, he wept and paid him homage. The two were closeted together for a long time. Khosrow said, "You are scion of Nush and Ravan, but misfortune has dogged your reign. You know that if I had been here to support you, not even a needle would have been permitted to scratch the tip of your finger. Think of what your orders are for me, now that sorrow has come to you, and my heart is filled with grief. If you command me, I shall be a slave guarding you. I have no desire for the crown or the army, and will cut off head before you if you order me to." Hormozd replied, "You are a wise man, and you know this day of hardship and despair will pass away. I've 3 requests to make of you, no more. Grant me these 3, and I'll not ask for 4. First, that as day breaks in the morning light, you'll sing to me and drive away the night. Next, that you'll send a warrior to me, a veteran of warlike cavalry, who'll talk of wars and hunts, and see he brings a book that tells the exploits of our kings, so that in hearing them I'll find relief from my incessant pain and constant grief. Thirdly, see that your uncles understand they're your inferiors here, and that this land is yours to rule, not theirs. Bind them, blind them, and make their days a darkness for my sorrow's sake." Khosrow replied, "May anyone who does not mourn for your blinded eyes perish, and may your enemies be swept from the earth. But consider, Bahram Chubaneh has become a formidable warrior, and he has innumerable cavalry and swordsmen with him. If I dispose of Gotham, I have no one to turn to help me against Bahram. As for the horsemen, you've known the battles and banquets to recite the stories of ancient kings for you. I'll send new ones to you constantly. I wish your heart wisdom and relief from the pain you suffer." He left his father's presence in tears and told no one his secret thoughts. The son was a kinder man than the king, and as a sage once said, "A sweetly spoken youth is finer than a difficult and quarrelsome old man." But in the end, the virtuous and vicious both lie beneath the dust. Bahram was astonished when he learned that the king's eyes had been put out with hot irons, that the light had died away from the gardens to Narcissus, that Hormozd's good fortune was at an end, and his son now sat on his throne. For a while he was taken aback and brooded on this turn of events. But then he ordered that the army's drums be sounded and his great banner be brought out onto the plain. The baggage was loaded, the cavalry mounted, and Bahram prepared to do battle with Khosrow Parviz. Audaciously he led his army, which was like a moving mountain, as far as the bank of the river Nerevan. Khosrow grew anxious when he learned of Bahram's aggressive advance and sent out spies. He said to them, "First, you must find out how many his army feels about his intentions, whether they're with him in his desire for war, or whether they're moving against him reluctantly. Then notice whether Bahram stays mainly in the center of the army or moves about among his troops. Also, learn how he holds audience and whether he ever thinks of going hunting while they're on the march." The spies set off on their mission without the army being aware of this, and when they returned, they went secretly to Khosrow and said, "From the nobles down to the young recruits, his soldiers are with him in everything he does. When his men are on the march, he is always moving among them, sometimes with the right wing, sometimes the left, and then with the baggage train. He has everyone's confidence and has no need of outside help. He holds court like a king and hunts in the same fashion. All his behavior is that of a king, and he constantly reads the book of Shahnameh and Demna." Khosrow said to his vizier, "We have a long business ahead of us. Bahram terrifies the monsters in the oceans when he rides out against his enemies. He's learned how to act like a king from my father when he was the king of the world. He's taken Shahnameh and Demna as his vizier, and no one has a human advisor who's better than this. To Goshtam and Bandai, he said, sorrow and trouble are my partners now. Men like Jerdu, Shapur, Endian, the leader of the Armenians, as well as other nobles, sat with the king in secret council. After their deliberations, Khosrow Parviz led his army out from Baghdad and pitched his pavilion on the plains. The two armies are now close together, on the one side the commander and on the other the king. When the world's light declined in the sky and night spread its dark curls, sentries were posted on either side. Then, as the night grew dry-lipped and sick at heart and fled from day's danger, the din of drums began with both camps, and the sun rose to guide them to battle. The king ordered Bandai and Gostam to put their iron helmets, and he went forward with his nobles to the riverbank. When the sentry reported to Bahram that the enemy's forces were within 2 bow shots, he summoned his advisers. He mounted his white charger, a proud, fine horse with a black tail and brazen hooves, grasping an Indian sword whose blow was like lightning from a cloud. Bahram rode forward, glittering in glory. Izad Goshhap was on his left, and Iam Goshhasp and Yalan Sinna, both longing for combat and filled with courage, accompanied him. There were also 3 Turkish warriors in his retinue, men who had sworn loyalty to Bahram, saying that if they saw a king become separated from his men, they would bring him dead or as a captive to Bahram. On the other side, Khosrow waited on the other Bahram, and between them flowed the river Nerevan. The soldiers on both sides watched to see how Bahram would approach their king. And here is where I end my tales for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends,